Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics. In this show we'll be discussing the rise of council tax in Kent and Medway and the changing political landscape of the county. Joining me now in the studio is Medway Labour leader Vince Maple and Tim Luckhurst from the Centre of Journalism at the University of Kent. Thanks very much for joining me. So first up, we'll be talking about council tax. With the government's austerity drive putting a squeeze on town hall budgets, is there any real alternative to putting up our bills? Ben Kennedy has more.
Every month, most of us get one of these through the door. It's a council tax bill. It's your and my way of paying for important local services. It pays for my rubbish getting taken away. It pays for the roads that we drive on. It even pays for many of our car parks. But you've probably noticed we're having to pay more and more for it. Yet councils are having to cut back on the amount they spend. We're paying more for less. But do we really mind if it means safeguarding local services?
I think if it improves services and improves things for Maidstone, then I don't see a problem.
Depends where it goes. I mean, I'm disappointed at the government not letting Kent have anything for the Operation Stack. I think that was a very, very bad thing because that's a nationwide thing.
I don't like the idea at all.
Even if it means safeguarding local services?
Well, I suppose some say some services, yes. When you fire brigade, your ambulance sort of services.
The problem is that the amount of money received by councils from the government has been cut. This year alone, Kent County Council faces losses of £48.6 million. At the same time, the spending demands on councils is also increasing. So one way they are trying to deal with this shortfall is by upping your council tax bill. For example, if you live in a Band D property in Medway, you will be paying just more than £68 more than you would have 5 years ago. If you live elsewhere in Kent, your bill to KCC will now be more than £85 higher than 5 years ago, after the council voted to increase council tax by 4% this week. So we're paying more, yet councils are struggling more than ever to keep your services running. The question is the strategy of slashing budgets and swelling tax bills really sustainable?
We have done all we can to keep council tax as low as possible over the last 5 years. We've frozen the council tax in 3.
We are all extremely disillusioned with what is happening in central government, and these cuts just cannot continue.
What would you do differently if you were a leader?
Well, it's very difficult to say, isn't it? Because I don't have that responsibility and I don't have that advice from my senior officers.
Well, if the opposition doesn't have any other ideas, what else can KCC and other councils do? Without more money from central government, it seems not very much. Ben Kennedy, KMTV.
So Vince Maple, disillusionment, disenchantment, has the government got to plough more money into local councils, or is that just a simplistic notion of what we need to do?
Well, what we've seen since 2010 is local government taking a disproportionate hit from the rest of the public sector when it comes to the issue of finance. And it's all well and good people like Alan Jarrett and Paul Carter saying that they're having to deal with these tough decisions. It's their government. And quite frankly, we're in a position now where within the next 3 or 4 years, some local councils across the country are not going to be viable. They've got the increasing pressures of adult social care. The 2% increase we're going to see, quite frankly, won't even touch the sides when it comes to the pressures that are coming. Local government are a breaking point when it comes to the issue of finance.
Well, you say that, but don't councils have to do more to trim their spending around some of these areas which are not really directly related to frontline services? I mean, there's an awful lot of money swashing around in some town hall budgets.
Well, I would disagree with that. Look, I want to see local government being as efficient as possible, and Labour councils up and down the country are doing exactly that. The reality is, with the issue of adult social care, the increasing pressures there, the money, the LGA, not my words, the Local Government Association, the cross-party authority which looks after local government, says really clearly on their world-famous graph of doom that there's just simply at the current spending levels will not be enough money to deal with the statutory minimum, let alone any of the additional bits and pieces.
Well, let's hear from Alan Jarrett, the leader of Medway Council, on his views about the situation.
It's certainly sustainable at the moment because the idea of the increases in council tax are to make sure that we do keep services running effectively, and that's what we're doing at the moment. There will come a tipping point where people will have to make that choice between, do we want to keep all our services running, or do we want to pay a bit more for it, because government funding is falling, the country's got no money, and people still want their services, and we want to provide them.
Alan Jarrett's saying there will come a time when something radical has to happen and there'll be a tipping point. Some people would think that tipping point's already arrived. Is it time to look at the local government map in Kent and decide to do things differently?
Look, I think absolutely. I've been clear that I'm a big supporter of the issue of unitary authorities. I think they work. I think Medway works as a concept for local government, because again, you do cut out a number of levels of bureaucracy. What we're seeing from the government is this kind of idea of devolution, but then still telling local government what they've got to do, not genuine devolution at all.
Tim Luckhurst, devolution. Does Kent need the equivalent of a northern powerhouse, if you like, to restore its reputation? And
I will go a certain distance with Vince on this. I think unitary authorities are more efficient too, but I think it would make an absolutely minuscule difference. I think we have to face a really harsh reality at the moment. Whether we had a Labour government or the current Conservative one, finances are extremely tight. We're teetering on the brink of a new recession, and there will have to be cuts, whoever is in office. It is true that councils in the South East are having a particularly hard time. They're not getting the sort of subsidy that councils in some wealthier Conservative areas are getting, but there is no easy solution to this. This is a period of austerity, not because the government wants it to be, but because it genuinely is in terms of the global economic climate.
OK, thank you very much. Let's move on to discuss now where the parties stand in Kent 9 months after the general election. Has UKIP's purple balloon burst, and is Labour making up any ground under a new leader? First, Andy Richards looked at how the political map of Kent has changed in the last few years.
It all started with the by-election in Rochester and Strood. Mark Reckless won back his seat in Parliament as a UKIP MP after defecting from the Conservative Party. From there on, the political race for the general election in May 2015 started to look complicated. VIPs from all parties paraded across Kent trying to court voters out of a possible stalemate or another coalition government. But Kent's political journey started to change 20 years ago. Since the general election in 1997, the county's been turning blue, becoming a Conservative stronghold since 2010. And even though last May saw Kent vote Tory again, there was a new player on the scene, UKIP. The battle was at its fiercest in South Thanet, where UKIP leader Nigel Farage fought for a seat in the Commons. But even if Farage didn't get to be an MP, UKIP came second in Sevenoaks, Rochester, Mid-Kent, North Thanet, Ashford, South Thanet and Folkestone and Hythe. Back in Thanet, the local council saw a majority of UKIP members take hold. We went to find out what UKIP voters had to say 9 months after the election.
Well, I used to vote Labour, then I thought I'd give UKIP a chance, see what happened, but nothing's happened yet, has it? So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, I used to vote Conservative and then I found a bit stale, their politics down here anyway. And so I thought we'd go for a change. And I like what Nigel said, so we give him a break. Yeah.
They had plenty to say when the election was coming up, but they don't seem to have... You don't hear so much about them now, I don't think. No.
The next big test is the upcoming EU referendum. The voice of the people of Kent and the country will send a strong message to both government and political parties. This is Andy Richards for KMTV.
Well, whatever way you look at it, Vince, the Tories have got a grip on Kent and it's going to be very hard to loosen that. How do you think Labour's fortunes are faring after the election of a new leader?
Well, clearly last May was disappointing. We've got Jeremy Corbyn in as our new leader now, and we've saw very recently in Thanet, you saw residents, of course, of Thanet there saying, I think they don't feel the world has changed with the UKIP council. Of course, it's been chaos down there. But actually, in the most recent electoral test, Labour won a seat off of UKIP.
Well, yeah, hold on. That's one election test. You had a second election test before that, actually, in Ashford, where you managed to lose a safe seat to the Conservatives. That's extraordinary.
Well, I think if you look at the Ashford result, there was a three-way split, and I think that actually shows where we are in Kent at the moment. You know, Conservatives have held seats in Kent for a period of time. UKIP are undoubtedly still an electoral force. It would be naive to say otherwise. But the Labour vote is holding up, and in some cases, increasing. I think Jeremy Corbyn has got to prove himself to the people of Kent and the whole country between now and 2020.
Jeremy Corbyn is not talking the same language that Tony Blair did back in the 1990s and early 2000s when Kent had an equal number of parliamentary seats with the Conservatives. You've got a very long way to climb back, haven't you?
Well, I think it's about looking at the issues, and one of the first issues that Jeremy spoke about, and I know from talking to people not only in Medway but across the whole county, is, you know, we have hundreds of thousands of commuters here. People feel frustrated by the train services. They're delayed. They are not fit for purpose. Jeremy Corbyn and the team have made a very clear position on that. I know that will benefit people here in Medway and across the whole county.
Do you sense that you're really picking up some momentum? Because if you look at how Medway seats fared in 2015, it was a pretty disappointing result. You know, you lost ground in seats that you'd held under Tony Blair for 3 elections.
Look, I think Medway seats were not unique with the rest of the country. I think everybody was disappointed from a Labour perspective on 1 minute past 10 when the exit poll came out. I think there were a lot of heavy hearts. I think we've got some time to reflect now. We've got clearly things like the Police and Crime Commissioner election, and I hope that my friend and colleague Tristan Osborne gives a good shout for that election. It will be an interesting battle to see what happens there in May.
Well, you're talking very positively about Labour's. Tim, are there really any grounds for Labour optimism that it can restore its fortunes in Kent?
I think that the Labour Party has got a colossal mountain to climb here in Kent. It's not inconceivable, but several things need to happen, and they need to happen quickly. Firstly, we have to acknowledge a simple truth. Labour, with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, is unelectable. Corbyn doesn't even want to be Prime Minister. He wants to be the leader of an ideologically pure socialist sect. So the Labour Party is going to have to change its leader, and I am not the only person in British politics who knows that to be a fact. Jeremy Corbyn is less popular than William Hague was as leader of the Conservative Party, less popular than Michael Foot at the nadir of his leadership of the Labour Party. So for a start, Labour needs to make the internal changes urgently and now.
Well,
I mean, I look, Karen Constantine in Thanet says that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour is electable. We're winning in Thanet, which was the only
but history
UKIP
and
council in the
all
country.
electoral evidence says it isn't, Vince. And there's another point. For Labour to make a comeback in Kent and to restore the two-party balance which we have seen historically here, it has to be a credible party of government. I said that the first stage in that is having a credible leader, but the second stage is having real electoral prospects. Let's face it, the Labour Party's fortunes will not be decided here. They'll be decided north of the border in Scotland. Without the 50 seats Labour used to have in Scotland, they have to win in England seats that they haven't won since 1945. Now that is a huge challenge, and until that is resolved, I think Labour's prospects are distinctly worrying.
what about UKIP? Because we know a lot of people sided with UKIP, possibly from Labour's supporters. Has the purple balloon burst, or is it being deflated? Because it built up with tremendous momentum since the European elections and the council elections, and then...
Paul, I think it's the crucial point. The reason I don't say that Labour is finished in the South East is because I think that UKIP's fortunes are in decline. They're in chaos too. Their leadership doesn't know what it's doing, and there's a huge elephant on the horizon. It's called the referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. If the Conservative Party leads Britain into Brexit, UKIP no longer has any purpose. So I think that there is all to play for in Kent politics, but the big challenges are on the left, because I don't see UKIP replacing Labour as the party of opposition here, and I really don't see the Liberal Democrats making any progress whatsoever.
And do you think Nigel Farage is going to stay on as leader?
I think that Nigel Farage may well stay on as leader, but if by doing so he renders his party less popular electorally than it might otherwise be, he won't be doing any favour to those in UKIP who want it to be more than an anti-European protest movement.
Well, Tim, thanks for that. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. That's all from us here at Paul on Politics. Thanks to our guests for coming into the studio. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, you can catch up on all the latest political news by following me on Twitter @PaulOnPolitics. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.